Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Onion Soup, the show where we pull back the layers of metaphysics and reality to demystify spirituality. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Miss Phyllis Leavitt, who's the author of the book America in Therapy. And I'm really excited to hear about this because it really talks about taking a nation in crisis and treating them like any other individual that really needs therapy. How are you doing today, Miss
Mhm. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. And I love your intro, by the way. Your pictures are beautiful.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit more about your book and how did you get started with this?
And one thing that I'm so excited about your intro because the reason why I wrote this book really came out of my own spiritual pursuits, which is all about reclaiming our most essential self and our connection to something higher, or for me that was and having been a psychotherapist for over 30 years. I was very familiar with the things that hurt people and the things that disconnect people from their essential self and often from any connection to anything higher because they're so focused on surviving. And, um, and it was really out of my own pursuits that I wanted to bring those worlds together and bring love back into the conversation of our country because and I know that might sound a little airy fairy, but it's not. It is love and belonging and safety are the best food for human beings. We thrive in that kind of environment where we're seen and valued and loved and cared for. Everyone does, and yet that's not part of our national agenda.
Mm,
And we expect that in a family, right? We expect parents to do their best. And often parents can't because of their own conditioning, but we expect them and hope that they will love their children and provide for them and treat them fairly and equally and, clothe and house them the best they can equally. And yet, as a country, we don't ask that of our leaders. We don't ask for that good family dynamic where everyone belongs and everyone is cared for. And so I started to see our country and any large institution, all the way up to a government, as operating just like a family and either operates on a healthy family dynamic or a dysfunctional or abusive family dynamic. And I began to see so many abusive family dynamics in our country that I felt like I needed to talk about through that lens because we know so much in the field of psychology about what causes that and what perpetuates it and what you need to interrupt that cycle.
mm.
So that's the short version, but it really came out of in my own healing and my own injuries to love and belonging that made me see this picture as just huge and expansive.
Interesting. So I guess my first question about that is how is a nation similar to a family? Like when you have your hierarchy of the family, the parents or perhaps grandparents, and then the children, who would play which role?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question because that's a lot of what I really try to share with people, and the perspective that I have from working with families and individuals, because we all bring our family dynamics to therapy, whether we bring our actual family or not, um, is that there is a hierarchy of power for sure in a
Hmm.
family, and it's appropriate. It's appropriate that parents are in charge of bringing up their children. That being said, however, in a healthy family, there's a feedback system that's safe. Children can comment on how they feel. They can share their feelings. They can ask for what they want. Um, there's in a healthy family, you can do that in safety. You may not get what you want, but you won't be shamed or beaten or excommunicated because you disagree or because you look different or because you want something that your parents don't want to give you, um, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So there's a sense of equal value and equal worth, even if the power differential is appropriately different. And in a country, it's not that different. We have people that we elected to be in charge of certain functions in the government, and we've given them that authority. But it feels like in the family of America today, there's a huge disconnect between those who have that authority and the voices of the general population. And by that I mean all voices. And as human beings, we will never agree. I don't even think that's in the nature of human beings, that we will always agree or have the same beliefs or have the same needs or have the same values. We certainly don't have the same genders. um, but there needs to be a place for all those voices in safety. And we have become so polarized that it isn't safe to disagree today.
Mhm.
And that is a sign of an abusive family system, where certain voices are punished or ostracized or silenced or shamed or discredited. I mean, this is exactly what happens in abusive families. And
Mhm.
I think that's escalating in our country, this sense of right and wrong and good and bad, with very little good communication. And one of the reasons why I think the psychological lens is so important to bring, and why I talk about America in therapy, um, is because psychology is not partisan. It's not about who's right and wrong. It's
Mhm.
not about choosing sides. It's about helping people communicate and come to deep understanding and deep listening and hopefully empathy and some kind of cooperation and agreement, so that they can continue together in safety. That's what psychology is all about if you're talking about family therapy or couples therapy. And we have the opposite going on here, where it seems like the investment is who's going to win the argument and who's going to ostracize and punish and discredit the other side more. Um, and when you have parents who are doing that with each other, you have hurting children. And
Yeah.
when you have government officials who are doing that, you have a hurting population. And we have a hurting population in America.
Wow. How do you think we got here? Because when America first started, we were really together as a country, as we fled Europe, as Americans came over and then fought against the tyranny of the king. So we were together then. At what point did this disparity start?
Well, I'm not a historian, so I won't pretend that I actually have the answer or answers to that question. But the things that I can say that I think that help shed light on your question are that many, many people who have come here from the beginning and over time who have immigrated to the United States come from trauma, come from poverty, come from fleeing persecution, come from wars. Not everyone, but many people have come from trauma. And it's only recently that we started talking about treating trauma and looking at the effects of trauma. So we have generations of people who have fled trauma in our history who never got any help.
Mhm.
And one of the so that the effects of trauma get passed down generation to generation. Not with every individual, of course. There are people who just don't, who just rise from the ashes, and they somehow make it out because they're fortunate, because they came in with something powerful or whatever. But there are many, many people who don't, and who act those traumas out on their children and on their communities, and often become leaders, get elected, and then they have many people that they can act those traumas out on. And the point of view in America in therapy is that we can understand now, to a great extent, and there may be greater understanding that comes in future generations, but in the world of psychology, we have a lot of understanding about what those effects of trauma are when they're not treated. And I spend a good deal of time talking about them, and some of them I've mentioned. So when
Yeah.
people are hurt by other people, often they're blamed. I hit you because you were too rambunctious or you talked back. And often, on a large scale, people in power will often say, well, those people were targeted because they're inferior, or because they're lazy, or because they're different, or because they worship the wrong God, or they're the wrong color skin, or whatever. And so abusive people tend to blame their victims.
Mm,
And then often the victims take that on, like, I really am inferior, or they rebel.
mm,
But there's no safety in being victimized. You have to adapt some way. And I'll say this quickly: it's a big conversation, but the two big adaptations I see, along with a whole variety of symptoms that,
mm,
if we have time we can talk about, but the two big adaptations that I see when abuse or violence or discrimination is not treated are either learned helplessness, you're so overpowered that you stop fighting back, or you identify with the aggressor and you become like the aggressor because you're so afraid of being overpowered that you have to be the overpowering one.
mm.
And we see a lot of that in this country today. And it's a very dangerous escalation of psychological symptoms because, for many reasons, but I'll name like a top one here, and that is because people who have become powerless and people who want to dominate as a way to survive dysfunctional family dynamics are attracted to each other.
Mm.
The dominator is attracted to the person they can dominate, and very often the person who can be dominated is drawn to the person who can dominate them because we do what we know.
Mm.
So these are very dangerous dynamics in America.
Isn't that pretty common in pretty much every relationship, though, for there to be a dominator and a submissive? Not saying that one is completely abusive over the other, but really two people who are, we'll say, type A personalities, it's really difficult to get something done. And the same thing with people who are what we call type B personalities, same thing. So you kind of have to have that. Not saying that as a country, I don't
Right.
want to say anything about any. Saying
I
that it's,
think what you're saying is, yeah, we tend to, I think it's human nature to be attracted to something opposite from yourself. I think
mm,
that is the way we are. But it's when it becomes extreme that it's dangerous. There's all kinds of variations in human relationships that work, you know, um, but when it becomes extreme and a whole segment of the population is powerless and a whole segment of the population is over empowered, and then when you have then we're talking about something that's psychologically dangerous
mm,
because it escalates. And one of the reasons why I feel so strongly about this is that when a country is over empowered or a government is over empowered, let's say, and it has access to nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction, or taking a military and turning it against its own citizens, then we're really talking danger to the survival of the human race. And
mm,
I think that's where we stand. The investment in nuclear weapons and in weapons of mass destruction and the threatened use of them and the continued investment in war is something I really believe that we should all be alarmed about. Because if you had a family that was invested in killing people, we'd say they were criminal. We'd
mm,
say they need help, or and really they need help, but we'd say they need to be restrained. And yet that disconnect between what we want for ourselves and in our own homes and in our communities and what we allow on an international and national level, that disconnect for me is a sign of a mental unwellness. And that's what I like to call it because we have we don't have good associations with the word mental illness. It's mental
right.
unwellness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. It's like exactly like you said, like it is very common to be attracted to something that's opposite of yourself, but when that does hit that extreme level, it's extremely dangerous. And more to your point, when we're talking about the extreme level being governmental parties versus the people, and those institutions have access to weapons of mass destruction, then yeah, that can be very damaging.
Yeah. And we're really one of the things that we kind of understand in the world of psychology, and again, this is when people want to work it out, and that's actually the big kingpin. Let me digress for a minute and say I woke up yesterday morning and I had this kind of like light bulb realization
Mhm.
that my whole book, American Therapy, is really about, can we make a commitment to repair our human relations?
Wow.
Because that's really the bottom line. We're going to have ruptures. We're going to have disagreement. There'll probably always be some element of conflict because we're just different beings with different needs and
Mhm.
different conditioning. Can we be committed to sit down at the table and repair our relationships without violence?
Wow. Yeah,
And
I
that to me is the bottom line. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say I just agree because you can't fix a problem unless one, you recognize the problem, but then
Right,
two, you have to be willing to go through the changes to fix that problem. But we're
right,
gonna take a really quick commercial break.
sure.
Hello, welcome back, everyone. So, before we left for the break, we were talking about being committed to fixing the problems that occur, one, in any relationship, which is very important to state, but primarily as a country, as a nation. So, how would you start addressing fixing the problems? Do you start the symptoms? How would you do that?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I liked to talk about from the American therapy point of view is that we have tools in the world of psychology to help people bridge those gaps in their understanding of one another and in their behavior toward one another. And if we could begin to implement some of those on a governmental level, we would have such a different role model for our country, for our children, for our citizenry, and for the world. And it just starts with, it starts with sitting down at the table, not getting up, not storming out, not threatening, but even if you are angry, even if you're upset, even if you're hurt, a willingness to listen to the other person's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because most of us really want to be heard. I don't know anybody who doesn't want to be heard, but we haven't been taught how to listen to each other. So we haven't been taught how to give the other person the kind of listening that we want from them. And that's at the heart of a lot of violence, is that people don't feel heard. Instead of having the tools to sit down and someone to help them navigate their differences, they just act out in whatever way they do. And unfortunately, like I said, some of the ways that we act out are, some people just give up and the other people just take over. And that's not all, that happens. Sometimes it turns into violence. So the first thing is restraining our most aggressive impulses and being willing to sit down. And one of the things that's really beautiful that I learned as a therapist working with couples is to start those sessions with this beautiful visualization. You have these two people, you ask them to look at each other because sometimes they don't even want to look at each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you ask them to visualize that there's a bridge between them. And each person's job, the best they can do it, and we don't do it perfectly, but the best we can do it, is to make an effort to cross the bridge into the other person's world
Mm-hmm.
and try to see through their eyes. And I'm asking you to do that for me, and I'm willing to do that for you. And it just sort of frames the whole thing. Okay? So you start with that. I'm not going to slam the door and walk out. I'm not going to scream at you. I'm not going to threaten you. I'm going to listen the very best I can. I'm going to reflect on myself. What is going on with me? Where am I coming from? Am I coming from a wound? Am I coming from a legitimate need? Am I coming from respect for you and for me? Or am I coming from, I just want what I want and I want it now? Or I'm right and you're wrong and that's all there is to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like really taking responsibility for myself. Where am I coming from? How have I behaved? Was I screaming at you too?
Yeah.
Was I calling you names, or was I putting down your point of view, or was I walling you out, or was I threatening you, or was I whatever I was doing, or was I just rolling my eyes,
Mhm.
and dismissing you? Maybe it was as little as that, but not little. Because if I roll my eyes, you immediately know I don't hear you and I don't care about what you're saying. So I reflect on myself. I take responsibility for myself. And then the next, excuse me, the next element would be, and this is all with like, deep listening. Like, I'm
Right.
not going to attack you. I make I statements as best as I can. This is how I feel. This is what I think. And this is what I would really like from you.
Mhm.
Allowing the other person to do that as well. Um, and I call the next step making amends. If there's something I need to say I'm sorry for,
Mhm.
say I'm sorry. If you have ever had the experience of someone genuinely apologizing to you, you know how good it feels. And we all want that. We want people to be accountable for themselves, but you can lead the way by by being the one who does that.
Right.
And I know I think that's one of the hardest things for human beings to do. Actually, is to say, I was wrong.
Mhm.
I shouldn't have said that to you, or I really didn't have a nice tone of voice, or what I did. I know it hurt you, and I'm sorry. I think that is such a powerful, powerful form of communication. And then
Yeah.
the next one is, go ahead. Yeah,
No,
jump
no,
in.
go
Go
ahead. I'm
ahead.
still listening. I was like, wow, this is great.
And the next one is like, at that place, can we come to an agreement? Sometimes what I've seen with people and I've seen in my own life is once we've really heard each other and we've dropped some of our defenses and we're willing to cross the bridge into the other person's world,
Mhm.
um, the disagreement just evaporates. And either I can say, yeah, I was wrong, or the other person says, yeah, I can see your point of view, and then we reconnect. And sometimes it's not quite that full emotionally, but if you can come to some agreement, even okay, I make a commitment that when I'm upset with you next time, I will do my very utmost not to raise my voice.
Mhm.
That's already a step, even if we don't feel emotionally connected. But the goal is that we actually feel reconnected with one another. I feel you're caring for me. You feel my caring for you. And out of that, we're much less likely to have conflict because we're already more willing from the start to work things out before they get really tense, if that makes sense. Or we have the tools to come back and repair the next argument we have or the next rupture we have. And so I'd like to see these principles brought to our Congress, for instance,
Mhm.
to have trained facilitators navigating the conversation, telling, having it be policy that you don't get up and walk out,
Mhm.
that you don't, you know, hurl bad words at each other, or slander each other's personalities or their families,
Mhm.
that we ask of our leaders, our people in power, to do the same kind of respectful healing work that we would ask of our family members, that we want from our loved ones, that we would like from our bosses, from teachers in the school, from officials in our communities. It's no different, and what an amazing model that would be. I'd like to see psychology and family dynamics taught in every school. I'd
Mhm.
like young people to grow up knowing what these dynamics are all about, what healthy dynamics are, what unhealthy dynamics are. I'd like to see some of these principles of providing for all family members equally become national policy.
Mhm.
There's a million ways that these things can be used on a national level.
Wow. Yeah, that's everything you said just really resonated, honestly. I was just thinking that one, from an individual perspective, I think that was really important for people to hear about their own relationships and their lives. But the way that you brought it to the national level, I do think it would be great to have some form of a mediator who had a
Right.
psychological background to say, hey, I don't think that that person felt heard. Because
Right.
and then if you could do that not just at the level of the House or Senate, but even with your representatives here in state, and as the people who
Absolutely.
representatives, there should be a mediator. And as those representatives go, further to the House and to Congress to represent the people, there should be a mediator. So that's wonderful. How would you implement that? We only have a few minutes
Yeah,
left.
I know. I know. I think that for me, the beginning, and this is the reason why I wrote my book, is to just help inform the average person. Because I don't know that the average person even has access to any of these ideas or an understanding of family dynamics or dysfunctional family dynamics and healthy family dynamics.
Yeah.
And so I think the more people are educated, the more we can advocate for ourselves. These are the people we want in office. We want people who actually want to work things out.
Mhm.
And I mean, so much, it really saddens me beyond what I can even express to you how much time and money and effort is wasted at the highest levels of government and institution
Mm.
on bickering and fighting instead of representing the people and their needs. And
Yeah.
I think it's tragic in our country. Um, one lawsuit after another, one case that gets taken to the Supreme Court when people can't feed their children, when they don't have adequate daycare or education or health care, when they're not safe in their homes. It's heartbreaking
Yeah.
that this is how um, so many of our resources are being spent or on weapons.
Yeah. But we only have a few minutes. Is there anything that you want to leave with the audience before we end?
Yeah, I would just like to, I would love to, um, anyone who wants to contact me, please go to my website or it's it's my name, www.phyllisleavitt.com. I'm on YouTube. I have lots of podcasts and blogs and information about my book, American Therapy, and I'm open to personal contact with people if you have interest in what we're talking about. And I really appreciate you, Dexter, for having such a wonderful program. So, and thank you for being such a great host.
Thank you. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. It gave me a lot to reflect on just in my own personal life. But thank you so much for coming on. It's been great talking to you, Miss Phyllis. And thank you all the listeners and everybody that's viewing this. Bye. Have a great one.
Bye. Thank you so much.